The jarring ring of my cell phone startled me from my mundane afternoon. I fumbled to grab it from the coffee table, nearly spilling my lukewarm tea. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. The voice on the other end was one I never expected to hear again. My ex-mother-in-law, Edna. "Cassie, it's time." Her stern tone gave me chills. "How could you think of missing Silas's funeral?" I froze in disbelief. Silas, my high school sweetheart turned ex-husband, had died over a year ago, lost in a tragic car accident. At least, that was what Edna had told me herself in her last bitter phone call. "Wait, what?" I stammered. "I don't understand. Silas already." Edna cut me off sharply. "Don't play dumb. The service is tomorrow at St. Mary's." My pulse pounded as I struggled to make sense of her words. St. Mary's, where Silas and I had married 13 years ago. "Edna, you told me Silas died last January," I insisted, my voice shaking. "You said you blamed me." "And he did," she snapped. "But now he's passed again. Don't tell me you plan on disrespecting my boy by not showing up." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat paralyzed, my 4-year-old son Eli's laughter from the next room barely registering through the fog clouding my mind. Somehow in my gut, I knew Edna's call was no cruel prank. I grabbed my laptop with trembling hands, quickly typing Silas's name into the search bar. An obituary stared back at me from the glowing screen. My handsome ex-husband, frozen forever at age 32. Yesterday's date marked the finality of it in black and white. Silas was truly gone. But how? None of this made any sense. I skimmed the details of the tribute through vision blurred by tears. A tragic construction accident, survived by his wife Marcella and their infant son. Marcella. Her name jolted me as my shock morphed to anger. The woman Silas had left me for when I was pregnant with Eli. The woman who had swooped in to take my place. I shoved back the bitter memories threatening to overwhelm me. Marcella was far in my past now, just like Silas. But this funeral brought everything roaring back. Grabbing Eli's hand, I resolutely led him out the door to my car. I had to know what kind of sick game was being played here. And I refused to let Eli's rightful place be erased by the woman who had already taken so much from us. St. Mary's loomed before me more foreboding than I remembered as I marched towards it. Eli's little hand nestled securely in my grip. I did not know what I would discover inside about Silas's supposed double death, but I knew one thing for certain. I would protect my son and the truth at all costs. The pews of St. Mary's were packed, stifling even, yet an almost eerie silence still hung in the incense-filled air. I clutched Eli close as I made my way to the front, ignoring the glares and whispers cutting through me with each step. I held my breath, bracing myself for my first glimpse at the photos adorning Silas's closed casket. Sure enough, the images chilled me to my core as we approached. Smiling portraits encircled elaborate bouquets and candles, a vibrant Silas frozen in time forever at 32 years old, exactly as the recent obituary had depicted him. My gaze turned towards the largest portrait, which featured Silas embracing a woman with flowing blonde hair and a cunning smile, Marcella. Underneath it sat a makeshift playpen where Marcella's infant son kicked and cooed, oblivious to the morbid day marking his father's death. I had just bent down instinctively to soothe the crying baby when a cold hand grasped my arm. "Who do you think you're fooling?" A harsh voice spat as I spun around. I stared into the soulless gray eyes of Marcella herself, still clutching the child to her hip with a painted claw. "Get away from my son." Anger swelled within me. This fraud, raising Silas's boy, playing the role of the pretty young widow to milk this for all it was worth, it was revolting. "Didn't expect to see the ex-wife, now did you?" I seethed back, letting my contempt show. "Oh, and congratulations on the supposed tragic accident." Blood drained from Marcella's face. "Why, you little—" She sputtered, composing herself as mourners glanced our way. Her expression transformed to a well-practiced pout as she dabbed mock tears and sauntered towards the open casket. I watched with disgust as Marcella embraced Silas' parents, her sniffles loud in the pin-drop silence. Even now, her only concern was maintaining appearances for the sake of their fortune and estate. So blinded by greed that they actually believed her lies and supported this gold digger next to their only son's grave. A small hand in mine reminded me this show was not my concern anymore. I had my own flesh and blood to protect and promises to keep. The thought fueled me as I turned my back on Marcella's performance. with a resolve colder than the ice in her glare when she cried on their shoulders. She would not get away with this act of manipulation, and she would certainly never lay her claws on what was meant for Eli. Over the sobs, the priest invited us to view Silas one final time. With one last glance at Eli, we slowly approached the casket, flanked by flashy floral tributes like misplaced trophies. Lying inside, Silas looked hollow, almost diminished, a shell of the bright and vibrant soul I had once called mine. "Never forget that truth prevails over deception, no matter how wicked," I whispered softly to Eli as I squeezed his shoulder. As we left Silas to whatever peace death would bring him, I vowed we would uncover what Marcella so desperately wanted hidden behind her web of lies. The funeral took every ounce of my energy. As we exited the suffocating church, I knew uncovering Marcella's deceit was now non-negotiable. I asked my neighbor Holly, Eli's godmother, to watch him for a bit. Then I headed downtown, my heels clicking on the pavement with purpose as Silas's law firm came into view. I didn't have an appointment, but my determination must have shown. Before I could even open my mouth, his former assistant Julia embraced me in a tight hug. "Cassie? I can't believe it," she said, dabbing her eyes delicately with a monogrammed handkerchief. "First the accident, now this?" My ears perked up, senses on high alert. "Accident?" I asked. "You mean when he passed before?" Julia nodded, confusion knitting her brows. "Yes, last year. The awful car wreck out on River Road. I assumed you knew. They brought his body in and—" She trailed off with a shudder. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. There had been no tragic construction accident like Marcella declared, which meant she deliberately kept Silas's first death from me, allowing her to stage this second funeral circus under the guise of recent widowhood. Bile rose in my throat as the ugliness of her ploy came into sharp focus. By hiding Silas's initial passing, she ensured the steady flow of child support she orchestrated from my account, for Eli, right into her scheming hands. I thought I was providing for my boy, but in reality, that witch likely used every cent to fund her plush new lifestyle. As fury and disgust overwhelmed me, I managed to choke out the other burning question. "The baby, is he really Silas's?" Julia shook her head before lowering her voice to barely a whisper. "Rumor has it they were already separated when she got pregnant, but once Silas passed, she saw her opportunity." I reeled at this, the final crushing blow. In addition to using my son, this harpy had trapped my ex-in-laws with the ultimate manipulation, a motherless grandchild to dote on. Even in death, she ensured Silas's fortune would fund her through the boy's college years and beyond. Meanwhile, she attempted to erase my Eli completely, threatening his only connection to Silas's family and inheritance. Overcome with anger, I stormed out of the office, nearly knocking over a vase of lilies sent in loving memory of Silicon Valley's most ambitious lawyer. As I arrived on Marcella's manicured block, I felt containing my rage would be impossible. Sure enough, the sight of her smug smile enraged me as she rocked on the front porch with the baby nestled against her. Not today, witch, I thought. The next hour was a satisfying blur of unleashed fury as I confronted her with all I had learned. With each newly exposed truth, I relished the growing panic in her eyes. Her defeat was palpable, as I declared I would be filing a lawsuit first thing Monday morning to settle this injustice once and for all. "You can slither back into whatever hole you crawled from now," I spat as I turned to leave. "You'll never see another dime meant for my son." I walked away with strides full of renewed purpose. For justice, for Eli's legacy, and for the truth Silas deserved. This victory left the sweet taste of revenge on my lips at last. And tomorrow, the real fight would begin. I arrived at the lawyer's office, fueled by caffeinated determination, clutching folders full of paperwork I had gathered over the weekend. Bank statements, legal documents, Marcella's venomous threats. I was armed and ready for battle. The meeting started smoothly as I recounted my discoveries. The lawyer, Mr. Silverstein, listened thoughtfully, periodically adjusting his thin-rimmed glasses. Finally, he cleared his throat and leaned forward. "While these revelations about Marcella's past schemes are certainly concerning, without concrete evidence of current illegal activities, I'm afraid there's little ground for a case," he said gently. My eager smile faded. "What? She manipulated a dead man's estate for her own gain." I slid the threatening SMS messages across his desk. and she's clearly planning to deny my son his rightful inheritance." Mr. Silverstein grimaced as he perused Marcella's texts, gloating about securing power of attorney. "While distasteful, her actions appear strategically within legal bounds," he said. "Since you never married your son's claim." I cut him off, unable to contain my boiling frustration. So this witch can flaunt her schemes and lies, but I'm just supposed to sit and wait for her next underhanded attack? Sighing, Mr. Silverstein removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. "Without proof of actual fraud, we have no grounds for legal action. My best advice would be to wait it out." I slammed my hands on the desk, trembling with anger as I rose. "Unacceptable! My son's future is at stake thanks to that soulless, money-grubbing—" A knock interrupted my tirade. The door creaked open to reveal Julia, her eyes wide with shock. "Sorry to interrupt, but Cassie, you must come quickly." Julia cried breathlessly. "I just overheard Marcella on the phone with a strange man. They mentioned documents, custody." My heart seized in my chest. Marcella was already striking with her next scheme. I grabbed my bag, my mind reeling. "Did you hear anything else?" I asked. Julia shook her head apologetically. As we turned to rush out, Mr. Silverstein handed me a business card. "Call me immediately if you uncover solid evidence of wrongdoing," he instructed firmly. "With concrete proof, we can build a case." We sped back to Julia's office, where she recounted the bits of conversation she had overheard. As she mimicked the man's slimy tone, bragging about eliminating obstacles, my blood ran cold. This was beyond manipulation. Marcella had crossed over into criminality, and my son was the intended target. We had to catch her red-handed and fast. As Julia made calls checking databases, reality sank in. My days of civility were over. I had to stop reacting and take action. For Eli's sake, it was time to set the trap and play dirty. The pieces clicked into place with chilling precision. Bank statements I had discovered showed large, frequent transfers to a business associate named Derek. A quick online search of his profile made his line of work clear. And baiting this snake out of hiding would surely expose Marcella right along with him. As I plotted out the trap, adrenaline flooded my veins. By weaponizing Marcella's own ugly tactics against her, I would finally take back control. For the sake of Eli's future, her cruelty would be repaid in kind at last. This ended now. The annual Silicon Valley Law Gala was the perfect backdrop for my trap. I had discovered Marcella would be here tonight schmoozing potential investors for her new lifestyle brand. Bile rose in my throat, imagining her peddling leggings and false widowhood in the same breath. Well, not anymore. Tonight her lies would be exposed for the world to see. I had chosen my bait carefully, luring the ominous Derek to a shadowy rendezvous with the promise of a payoff. My eyewitness waited strategically behind a marble column, ready to catch every incriminating exchange on video. All that remained was springing the confrontation I had planned, so Marcella's facade would come crumbling down in front of the cream of the crop attendees. I spotted her across the ballroom, draped in an ostentatious black dress, already working the room with dramatic flair. Time to steal the spotlight, I thought, striding towards her, with rage burning through my veins. "Why, Cassie, what a surprise!" Marcella drawled, her expression morphing from warm charm to icy hatred in an instant. "I'm terribly sorry, but this is a private event. Now run along." The circle of executives glanced between us, curiosity piqued by the palpable tension. Perfect. "Private event, I scoffed. "More like hunting ground for your next victim right under the guise of entrepreneurship? Have you handed out catalogs showcasing your full web of lies yet?" Flashes of anger and fear crossed Marcella's face. "Why, I never. Someone escort this mad woman out at once." But her feigned outrage merely made me laugh. "Come now, Marcy, why don't you share with these kind folks how you conned my grieving ex-in-laws?" I swept my arm towards the captive audience, leverage exactly as I had planned. "Tell them how you seduced my husband away and then faked widowhood twice over for access to his millions." The watching crowd murmured uncomfortably. Before Marcella could respond, her cell phone rang. With trembling hands she answered, breathless fear filling her eyes as she listened. After a long pause, she choked out, "You told me this would work, that no one would ever find out." I grinned wickedly, crossing my arms. "Trouble with your partners in crime, I take it?" Marcella stared at me wild-eyed as I continued. Did you really think we wouldn't uncover your shady plans with that brute Derek to steal my son's inheritance? Right on cue, Julia stepped forward, clutching her phone, still recording Derek's incriminating exchange. "We have it all right here," Julia declared. "Your threats, lies, and hired thugs caught discussing falsifying custody documents." Marcella collapsed to her knees as her world crumbled around her, the damning evidence now on full display for all to witness at last. I leaned down, my tone icy. "Your games end here. You knew exactly what you stood to gain from my family's loss, and you didn't care who you destroyed in the process. Well, now the spotlight is on you." Satisfaction washed over me seeing her cowering and exposed. As security approached, Marcella searched the crowd, desperately seeking an ally, but she found only looks of disgust reflecting back at her. The bitter taste of retribution was even sweeter than I imagined. Finally, I had justice for Eli, for Silas's legacy, and above all, for the truth. Marcella's web of deception lay in ruins all around her. Now it was her turn to lose everything, and I would ensure she answered for her crimes if it was the last thing I did. The weeks following Marcella's public shaming blended together in a flurry of legal motions and strategy sessions. With evidence of her shady dealings now on full display, the battle had shifted to the courtroom. I sat calmly smoothing my dress suit as Mr. Leah Silverstein paced, reviewing our plan of attack. With the video footage clearly implicating Derek, Marcella's remaining credibility is questionable at best, he affirmed. Our case highlighting her deceit around Silas's estate and inheritance rights is quite strong. I nodded, steeling myself as we entered the imposing courtroom. Marcella sat at the defendant's table, the hollows of her cheeks betraying her normally glamorous visage. Her bloodshot eyes narrowed to slits as I held her glare with steely determination. The fantasies of my victory had kept me energized throughout sleepless nights. Today, sweet justice would finally be served. The room fell silent as the judge entered. For 3 tense hours, Mr. Silverstein presented an impenetrable wall of evidence showcasing every manipulating half-truth and bold-faced lie Marcella had spun to profit off Silas's tragic death. Phone records proved her secrecy around his actual passing. Bank statements exposed money funneled from my personal accounts straight into her pockets, and most damning, Derek's own written testimonial implicated Marcella as the true mastermind behind the plot to erase my son's claim. I watched Marcella's haughty facade slowly crack and crumble as the weight of truth exposed her deceit. As Mr. Silverstein turned the floor over to her, she sat frozen for a long minute before stammering weakly in self-defense. But her sputtering lies stood no chance now. She had no choice but to confess haltingly to concealing Silas's initial death. A gasp rippled through the gallery at this admission. When pressed about her motivation by the judge, Marcella dissolved into hysterical sobs about debts and bad investments. My lip curled in disgust, hearing her still make excuses rather than take accountability. After she composed her sniveling, the judge turned to Mr. Silverstein. "In lieu of this compelling evidence, I am prepared to rule on the matter of Silas Gray's estate and inheritance rights. Please approach." This was it, the moment that had kept me fighting through countless ruthless attacks. Marcella paled as we stood next to her, awaiting the verdict that would decide my son's fate. On the matter of Silas Gray's estate, full rights shall be granted to his named next of kin, his son Elijah. My breath caught as joyful shock washed over me. Additionally, Miss Marcella Pierce will hereby repay all misallocated funds and forfeit any custody claim over the child. I blinked back grateful tears as justice rained down at long last, stripping the woman who had taken so much from my son for her own gain. The rest was a dizzying rush of celebratory hugs and phone calls to Eli, who giggled gleefully at the news. Meanwhile, Marcella sat frozen, the judge's gavel signaling her defeat. I watched as bailiffs approached to apprehend her on formal fraud charges tied to years of financial deception. As they led her shambling body past me, I stood tall, finally seeing her for the powerless coward she was, without her web of lies for protection. "You forget who you were dealing with," I said coldly. "Did you really think you could threaten my child, Silas's child, without consequence?" As she disappeared from view for good, I let the sweet taste of revenge wash over me at last. With her poisonous shadow now banished from our lives forever, Eli and I could finally embrace the bright future that was rightfully his. Justice indeed prevailed. In the weeks following the trial, I was able to breathe freely for the first time in years. Marcella was sentenced to 3 years behind bars, a satisfactory reckoning for the havoc she had wreaked on countless lives. The duty of tying up legal loose ends around Silas's estate fell to my trusted advisor, Julia. As we sat signing paperwork, joy overwhelmed me seeing Eli's inheritance fully secured at last by his rightful guardians, Silas's parents Edna and Richard. A soft knock interrupted us. Edna entered, her usual haughty aura replaced by something resembling humility. "Cassie, I can't thank you enough for what you did," she said haltingly. Richard nodded behind her, his eyes glistening. We were so blinded. We never imagined Marcella was manipulating us that entire time. I studied their faces intently. The past could never be erased, but perhaps this ordeal had opened their eyes to what mattered most now. Family. I reached across the table and squeezed Edna's hand gently. "Let's focus on the future for Eli's sake." Richard and Edna both smiled through tears. For all our rocky history, we shared an unexpected bond now as guardians of Silas's legacy. Over lunch, we laughed reminiscing about a young, vibrant Silas, the man we all loved in different ways. Edna even shared baby pictures I had never seen before. A warmth filled me realizing that perhaps some good could come from even the darkest storms. Later at home, while tucking Eli into bed, I decided to share part of the story that had led us here. I told an age-appropriate version, not mentioning Marcella by name but focusing on themes of honesty, family, and karma. His big brown eyes widened with childlike awe as I spoke. "So that mean Lady lied? Is that why you had to go fight the bad guys in court?" I kissed Eli on the forehead, my heart swelling with pride. "Yes, my smart boy, but now the truth came out, just like it always does, and that mean lady can't ever bother us again." Eli giggled and squeezed his stuffed dog, the one Silas had given him years ago. "Well, I'm glad, 'cause now we get to stay with Grandma and Grandpa and inherit Daddy's big building downtown." I had to laugh at his innocent understanding of the legal complexity, but in his eyes shone the optimism and hope I had fought so hard to protect. Over the next year, life took on a beautiful rhythm I had scarcely allowed myself to imagine. Weekday breakfasts with Grandma and Grandpa, Sunday picnics reminiscing about Silas while Eli played, laughter, joy, and new memories bonding us together after so much loss. The only dark cloud still lingering was my regular visit to a maximum security prison to stare Marcella down as she crumbled mentally and physically under the weight of her crimes. To some it may have seemed cruel satisfaction, but having her fate sealed behind those unforgiving walls gave me peace of mind. Soon the anniversary of Silas's death arrived, a bittersweet milestone marking the closing of a painful chapter. We gathered as a family at his grave, each placing a rose while Eli babbled happily about his daddy. I gasped as Eli suddenly froze, pointing behind us all starry-eyed. "Look, it's Daddy," he squealed. "Hi, Daddy." We all turned with a start, seeing nothing but a glowing sunbeam breaking through the clouds. But somehow, I knew in that moment, Silas's spirit swirled around us, and through Eli's eyes, he witnessed the justice, closure, and family his memory deserved. Finally, we could all rest peacefully, thanks to the truth rising at last. The past was finally laid to rest on this sacred ground. Another year slipped by, filled with healing and closure. Our family grew closer than I ever could have imagined. Eli flourished with the love and support of 2 doting grandparents, and I found meaning embracing my role protecting Silas's legacy. But lingering darkness still occupied my thoughts. Marcella deserved to rot in prison, yet her continued existence so close by prevented me from ever fully moving on. The time had come for a fresh start, far away from the ghosts of past betrayal. My decision made, I gently broke the news to Edna and Richard over family dinner. Edna lowered her fork, eyes glistening with emotion. "Oh, Cassie, must you really go?" she asked softly. "These years with you and Eli have meant the world to us." I squeezed her hand, my own eyes welling up. "I'll forever be grateful for how you welcomed Eli, but too many memories haunt me here." I glanced at Eli playing happily. He deserves to grow up free from the shadows of his father's past. Richard cleared his throat gruffly. "We understand, dear. A clean slate is what you both need. But please, let us help set you up so Eli's future is secure." My heart swelled at this gesture. the ultimate display of love for the grandson they almost lost. That means everything. Thank you both, truly. Over the next few weeks, I tied up loose ends while Edna and Richard handled real estate and financial logistics. The day of our move finally arrived, bittersweet yet brimming with hope. Edna fussed over Eli, sneaking cookies and treats into his luggage when she thought I wasn't looking. As we stood at the front door for final goodbyes, the weight of the moment sank in. Edna pulled me into a crushing hug. "Promise you'll let us visit very soon?" she asked tearfully. "Maybe for Eli's next birthday?" I smiled through my own tears. "Of course, you're both welcome anytime. Take good care of Richard, okay?" Edna chuckled wetly with a wink. After one final check that Eli was securely buckled in his car seat, we all exchanged final hugs. As I shifted the car into drive, Eli cried, "Bye, Grandma! Bye, Grandpa!" while frantically waving his little hand. We drove in silence for a while, fields and farms zipping past outside. I breathed deeply, déjà vu washing over me from that pivotal drive to Silas's second funeral years ago. So much life had happened since. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Eli suddenly piped up from the back seat. I smiled at his bright eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're going to start a new adventure, baby. New city, new house. Doesn't that sound exciting?" Eli nodded enthusiastically. "Will I make new friends?" "Oh, and visit Daddy, too?" My heart fluttered hearing his innocent understanding. "Yes, my sweet boy, all of that and more. A fresh start for you and me." I clicked on the radio as a beloved song came on, the same one played at Silas's wedding during our first dance. My pulse quickened at the serendipity. Glancing in the mirror again, I was struck by Eli's resemblance to his father, his same kind eyes and grin. Silas's presence filled the space around us, enveloping me in warmth and propelling us onwards, towards the new memories we would make, carrying his spirit in our hearts forever. The past was finally laid to rest. Now nothing but open road and bright skies ahead, ready for our new beginning.